What if the reunion between father and son, the long-awaited, fragile moment after nearly 2 years apart, was shattered not by words, but by the metallic click of a car trunk opening? Imagine this: Prince Harry pulling up to Clarence's house, nerves already on edge, and suddenly, the royal guard steps forward, firm, unflinching, and lifts the lid of his vehicle. What they saw inside would ignite a storm that no one in the monarchy could have prepared for. From the very first second, you have to ask yourself, why would the King's Guard, trained, disciplined, and loyal to protocol, risk causing a public spectacle by searching the Duke of Sussex's car? Did they already know what they were looking for? Or was this one of those moments where destiny collides with secrecy and the truth bursts out in the most unthinkable way? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The answer lies in that trunk. Hidden away under layers of neatly packed bags, behind carefully folded travel clothes, was something no one expected Harry to be carrying. A collection so shocking, so entwined with royal history, that it pulled the curtain back on decades of family drama, suspicion, and betrayal. We're talking about heirlooms that once belonged to none other than Princess Diana herself. Pieces long thought to be locked away in the royal vaults, guarded as national treasures, and yet, somehow, they ended up in the back of Harry's car. Now pause for a second. Let's picture this scene not as a tabloid headline, but as raw, human drama. 19 months. That's how long it had been since King Charles and Harry had last been face to face. 19 months filled with bitter interviews, frosty silences, and whispers of family betrayal. The stage was already set for an awkward, emotionally charged reunion. And then this, the guard lifting the trunk. The unmistakable glint of Diana's jewels catching the light. The audible gasp from the palace staff who happened to witness it. And the shadow that crossed Charles's face when word reached him inside Clarence's house. Why would Harry bring those items here? Was it a gesture of reconciliation, a way of showing his father something sacred? Or was it an act of defiance, a reminder that Diana's legacy still stood between them? The very ambiguity of that moment is what makes this story so explosive. Let's be honest, family reunions are messy enough. Add a monarchy, millions of watchful eyes, and the ghost of Diana, and suddenly you don't just have drama. You have a spectacle, a firestorm, the kind of revelation that rips through headlines and shakes the very foundation of royal trust. Because think about it, jewels don't just walk out of the royal vaults. Someone has to move them. Someone has to know. So how did they get into Harry's possession? Who allowed it? And why now? Of all times, when the king had finally opened the door, hesitantly, yes, but opened it nonetheless. For his estranged son? The middle of this moment is what truly turns the knife. Harry, standing there, probably unaware of the exact timing, maybe even thinking he could control the narrative. The guard doing his duty, his expression unreadable as he lifted piece after glittering piece. The shock rippling through Clarence's house, from the kitchens to the king's private drawing room. And then the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, unmistakably furious. Charles himself striding into the courtyard, his face pale, his jaw set, his eyes burning with something far stronger than mere disappointment. The reunion, the moment that could have been tender, forgiving, transformative, was instead poisoned in an instant. The king, staring at the trunk as though it contained not heirlooms, but betrayal itself. The tension so thick, it silenced everyone around. Guards held their breath. Staff froze in place. Harry, perhaps caught between defiance and desperation, stood waiting for his father's judgment. And then came the reaction. Not quiet, not patient, not fatherly, but explosive. Charles didn't embrace his son. He didn't welcome him back. He stormed out, fury radiating from every step, making it clear that the wounds of the past 19 months were not healed, but ripped wider open than ever before. Ask yourself, what does it take for a king, a father, a man nearing the twilight of his reign, to reject his son in that way? Was it really about the jewels? Or was it about what they symbolized, Diana's lingering presence, Harry's refusal to let go, the past dragging itself into the present like a ghost that refused to stay buried? And here's the real kicker. If those jewels were indeed missing from the royal vaults, then this isn't just a family matter. It's a national scandal. It raises questions of theft, betrayal, and hidden truths that the monarchy would rather the world never see. Did Harry take them? Were they given to him secretly? Or is there a much deeper story, one that could shake public trust in the institution itself? This isn't just about a car trunk. It's about the symbolism of that discovery, the raw wound it tore open, and the chain reaction it set off inside the walls of Clarence House. But what came after? That's where the story twists even further, because Charles's storming out was just the beginning. Behind those closed doors, tempers clashed, alliances shifted, and secrets spilled that no one in the public was meant to know. And what unfolded next would make even the most seasoned royal watchers stop in their tracks. Because if the trunk was the spark, what followed was the firestorm, and no one, not even Harry himself, could have predicted how far the flames would spread. It all started with that sound. A heavy, deliberate click. The kind of sound that seems ordinary, just a car trunk being unlatched. But in that charged moment, outside the red-bricked walls of Clarence House, it was anything but ordinary. That single metallic echo cut through the air like a gunshot, and suddenly, everyone present knew they were witnessing something historic. Think about it. For 19 months, the palace had been a fortress of silence when it came to Prince Harry. No warm welcomes. No photographs of father and son sharing private moments. Just icy statements, carefully worded press releases, and the endless swirl of speculation. And then, in a single instant, that silence was shattered, not by words, not by an embrace, but by the opening of a trunk. Now here's the question. Why was the guard so intent on searching Harry's car? Royal protocol is strict, yes, but invasive searches of a senior royal's personal belongings? That's not just unusual, it's almost unheard of. Was there a tip-off? Did someone inside the palace suspect Harry of carrying something he shouldn't? Or was this Charles's command, a way of testing his son before allowing him across the threshold of Clarence House? Inside that trunk, under the soft folds of travel-worn clothing, lay the glittering proof of something far more scandalous than anyone imagined. Necklaces, tiaras, rings, pieces so iconic, so embedded in the memory of the British public, that even in photographs decades old, you can still recognize them instantly. These weren't just any jewels. They were Diana's. The very same jewels that had supposedly been locked in vaults, secured under watch, treated as untouchable relics of a woman who had become almost saint-like in the public's imagination. And yet, there they were, in Harry's possession. Can you picture the look on the guard's face? Trained to remain stoic, neutral, a professional to the last detail. But in that moment, even he couldn't mask the flicker of disbelief as each piece came into view. A tiara wrapped in protective cloth, a sapphire ring resting in a velvet case, a pearl necklace that once glistened around Diana's neck at a state banquet. Each item lifted out was another dagger to the heart of royal protocol. But let's pause here for a moment. Let's pull back from the scene itself and ask a question that millions around the world would demand to know. How did Harry even get these jewels? The royal vaults aren't exactly a casual walk-in affair. You don't just show up, flash your surname, and walk out with priceless heirlooms. It requires clearance, authority, and above all, trust. So, who trusted Harry enough to let him walk away with these pieces? Or, and this is the darker, more dangerous possibility, did he take them without permission? If that's true, then we're not just talking about a family drama. We're talking about royal theft. And if that word sounds too harsh, remember this. These aren't just glittering baubles. They're symbols of the monarchy's legacy. They carry with them centuries of history, power, and meaning. For them to be discovered in a car trunk is nothing short of a bombshell. Now, imagine being Charles in that moment. For 19 months, he'd waited. Part of him, maybe, had hoped this reunion would heal old wounds. That time had softened the bitterness. That father and son could at least speak without the shadow of interviews, memoirs, and accusations hanging between them. And then, before he could even offer Harry a handshake, this scandal explodes on his doorstep. You can almost hear the rage in his voice, can't you? Charles storming out, the staff scattering in his wake, his footsteps pounding against the stone. His first sight of the trunk wasn't just shocking, it was humiliating. To the king, this wasn't just about jewels. It was about what they represented. Diana, the woman who overshadowed him even in death. The mother Harry idolized, the constant reminder that his reign would forever be measured against her memory. And there they were, her treasures, paraded into Clarence's house in the back of a car like smuggled contraband. But let's not forget Harry. Was he shocked? Defensive? Silent? Did he bring those jewels intentionally, knowing the storm they'd cause? Or was he naive enough to think he could carry them back to his father as some kind of peace offering? Imagine his face as Charles approached, as the king's fury spilled over in front of guards and staff alike. The son who had flown across the Atlantic for a reunion was now standing on trial, judged before he could even speak. The buildup of tension in that courtyard was unbearable. Every second felt like an hour. Every glance, every breath, thick with questions no one dared to voice. Who else knew about these jewels? Were the palace walls about to leak this story to the press? And if so, how would the public react when they learned that Harry, of all people, was at the center of such a scandal? Because here's the truth, the public adores Diana. Her legacy is untouchable. Her possessions aren't just family heirlooms. They're sacred artifacts of a princess who was, in many eyes, more beloved than any king or queen of her time. If Charles believed Harry had taken them, then this wasn't just about personal betrayal. It was about public perception, about loyalty, about the monarchy's very image. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because Charles's storming out didn't just end the reunion. It triggered a cascade of events inside Clarence's house that no one outside those gates was meant to see. Conversations behind locked doors, furious accusations, desperate explanations, and whispers, yes, whispers, of who might have helped Harry in the first place. The trunk had been opened. The jewels had been revealed. But the secrets buried underneath this scandal were about to burst out, one by one. And what happened inside Clarence's house after Charles stormed out would not only shock the royal household, but would send ripples across the world stage. But the real question remains, was Harry's trunk discovery a mistake, or was it a calculated move in a much bigger game? Because the next chapter of this story will prove one thing. Nothing about that reunion was accidental. The king stormed out. That much is certain. His robes swished, his shoes struck the polished floors of Clarence's house like drumbeats of fury, and the stunned silence he left in his wake was deafening. But what happened after? That's where the story takes its sharpest turn. Because once Charles disappeared behind those carved oak doors, the air inside Clarence's house changed. It wasn't just tense. It was electric, buzzing, as if every wall, every corridor, had absorbed the anger and was now vibrating with it. Think about it. Clarence's house isn't just a royal residence. It's a stage where history has been made. Foreign dignitaries have walked those halls. State secrets have been whispered in its drawing rooms. And yet on this day, the drama wasn't diplomatic. It wasn't ceremonial. It was brutally, painfully personal. Let's picture the scene. The staff, frozen only moments before, suddenly sprang into motion. Aides scurried in all directions, some chasing after the king, others circling around Harry as though he were a dangerous intruder instead of the king's son. Security men whispered into radios. Curtains twitched. A butler, pale and sweating, slipped into the room with a tray of tea that no one touched. And there stood Harry, alone in the eye of the storm. How would you feel in that moment? Would you lash out, defend yourself, demand to be heard? Or would you stay quiet, knowing that every word you spoke could later be twisted, reported, dissected? Harry's face reportedly shifted between stubborn defiance and wounded disbelief. He had come for a reunion, perhaps even reconciliation, but what he got was judgment, anger, and chaos. Here's the thing about Clarence's house. Its walls are thin in more ways than one. Not acoustically, of course. These are centuries-old walls. But thin in the sense that nothing truly stays private. Staff gossip. Aides leak. Even the smallest of whispers inside those walls has a way of seeping out into the world. So when Charles stormed into his private chambers and slammed the door behind him, you can bet that his words, his fury, didn't stay confined. He dares bring her things here, one aide was overheard saying. The word her didn't need a name. Everyone knew it meant Diana. Another voice, low and anxious, muttered, "This will finish him. The king won't forgive this." And then, through the muffled walls, came Charles's voice. Not the controlled, regal tone of a monarch, but the raised, emotional cry of a father betrayed. 19 months, and this is how he greets me? With theft? With shadows of the past? Did Harry hear those words? We may never know. But the atmosphere outside that chamber grew heavier with every syllable. The staff's eyes darted from one another, silently asking, "What happens now?" Now let's dig deeper, because this isn't just about Charles's temper. This is about what those jewels meant. To Charles, they were a reminder of Diana's ghost. One that had haunted him since the day she entered his life, and one that still lingered even after her death. To see them emerge from Harry's trunk wasn't just shocking. It was insulting. It was as though Diana herself had been brought into Clarence's house to overshadow him once again. But to Harry, those jewels may have meant something entirely different. Were they keepsakes? Proof of his mother's enduring love? Or perhaps they were bargaining chips, a way of forcing his father to acknowledge the unresolved pain of the past. Did he bring them to provoke, or to heal? That's the mystery, and it's one that neither side seems willing to explain fully. The middle of this chaos is where the contradictions bite hardest. On one hand, you have Charles, furious, humiliated, and determined to put his son in his place. On the other, you have Harry, standing tall, refusing to apologize, his silence perhaps louder than any words he could have spoken. And caught in the middle were the staff, torn between loyalty to their king and shock at what they were witnessing. And then came the whispers of betrayal. Because here's the question no one wanted to ask out loud. How did Harry get those jewels? The royal vaults are tightly controlled. The inventory is tracked. Every piece is accounted for. For those items to be missing meant one of two things. Either Harry had help from the inside, or the palace's most trusted custodians had failed. Both possibilities were unthinkable. Both were terrifying. The speculation began instantly. Was it a sympathetic staff member, loyal to Diana's memory, who slipped the jewels into Harry's hands? Or was it Meghan, always painted as the outsider, who pushed Harry to bring them back to Britain, perhaps as a statement, a power play? Every scenario carried its own explosive weight. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Charles reportedly called for his most senior advisors. The doors of his private chamber opened and closed in rapid succession as aides entered with papers, documents, and hushed voices. Harry was not invited in. He remained standing, waiting, isolated, a man who had flown across an ocean only to be treated like a stranger in his father's house. And as the chaos swirled around him, a new tension began to build. If the king had stormed out in fury, what would he do when he reemerged? Would he order Harry out of Clarence's house altogether? Would he call on the police to treat this not as a family matter, but as a criminal investigation? Or would he, in a rare moment of mercy, choose to hear his son out? That was the cliffhanger hanging over every heart in Clarence's house. The guards, the staff, even Harry himself, they all knew that whatever happened next could define not just a reunion, but the future of the monarchy itself. And when Charles finally opened that door again, his face was pale, his eyes dark with rage, and his words were not what anyone expected. Because what he did next wasn't just about Harry. It was about the monarchy's survival. The door creaked open. Slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the hallway snapped to it. The entire atmosphere inside Clarence's house felt as though it were suspended mid-air, hanging on what would happen next. And then, there he was, King Charles, his face drained of warmth, his posture rigid, his very presence radiating anger held tightly in check. This was not the king the world sees at ceremonial events. This was not the monarch in robes, waving politely to cheering crowds. This was Charles the father, Charles the man, Charles the king who had just discovered something he could neither ignore nor forgive. He didn't look at Harry immediately. He spoke to the room. Everyone out. Just 2 words. Sharp. Cutting. Immediate. The staff scattered like leaves in the wind. Guards retreated to their posts. Even senior aides, who moments before had been whispering frantically in corners, now melted away, their faces pale. Only Harry remained, standing in the middle of the grand hall, his hands tense at his sides. Finally, Charles's eyes locked on him. Close the trunk. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were low, cold, simmering with the fury of a man betrayed. The guard obeyed, slamming the lid shut with a heavy thud that echoed through the silence. And then it began. "Do you have any idea," Charles demanded, "what you've done?" Harry opened his mouth to reply, but Charles raised a hand. "No, not yet. You will listen." The king stepped closer, each stride deliberate. as though every inch of ground he closed between them was a declaration of authority. 19 months, Harry. 19 months since you chose distance over duty. And when you finally return, when you finally walk back into my house, you bring this. His hand gestured sharply toward the car, the trunk now shut, but the memory of what was inside burning in everyone's minds. The ultimatum came next, as swift and brutal as a sword falling. You will hand over those jewels. Every piece. Immediately. And you will explain, clearly, truthfully, how they came into your possession. If you do not, then you will not step foot inside Clarence's house again. Not today. Not ever. The weight of those words crashed over the room. Think about it. A father threatening permanent banishment of his own son. A king threatening to cut off one of the last remaining ties of blood in his fractured family. And all of it centered around the shimmering ghost of Diana's legacy. Harry's silence in that moment spoke louder than words. His jaw clenched. His eyes darkened. But he didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't yield. And that silence only enraged Charles further. Do you think I will allow you to parade her memory in this way? He spat. Do you think I don't see what this is? A stunt? A provocation? You bring her jewels here, my house, as if to remind me that she still lives on, that she still eclipses me. There it was, the heart of it. This wasn't just about jewels. It was about the ghost of Diana, still looming, still haunting, still threatening to unravel the fragile authority of a king who has never escaped her shadow. But then Harry finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but steady. They were hers. They should have been mine and William's. You know that. The clash of past and present, of legacy and loyalty, hung between them like a drawn sword. Charles's face contorted, torn between fury and something almost like pain. Not like this, he hissed. Not dragged from a trunk like stolen contraband. Not used as a weapon in whatever game you think you're playing. And then came the moment that shocked even Harry. Charles stepped back, straightened his shoulders, and delivered the words that turned the entire reunion on its head. You have one choice. Hand them over, or I will call in the crown jeweler and the Metropolitan Police. This will not be handled as family business. It will be handled as theft. You will stand before the law, Harry, before the nation. And if that's the path you want, so be it. Imagine the impact of that ultimatum. A father threatening to have his own son investigated. A king risking scandal that could tear the monarchy's reputation to shreds. All of it hinging on whether Harry would comply or defy. The room fell into suffocating silence. Harry's face hardened, his fists clenched, and for a moment, it looked as though he might say something that could never be unsaid. But instead, he uttered just one line, dripping with defiance. You wouldn't dare. Oh, but Charles would. And everyone in that house knew it. Because the king's next move wasn't just about family. It was about protecting the throne itself. And what he did after this ultimatum would shock not only Harry, but the entire nation. You wouldn't dare. Those were the words that hung in the air, sharp as glass, after Harry's defiant retort. His voice carried just enough conviction to sound brave, but beneath it, everyone could sense the tension, the quiet knowledge that his father, King Charles, was not a man bluffing in this moment. The king's eyes narrowed. His lips pressed into a tight line. And then, without another word, he turned sharply on his heel and barked a command to the nearest aide, who had hesitated just a moment too long in the corridor. Bring in the crown jeweler. Now. And call Scotland Yard. I will not have Clarence's house turned into a circus of stolen relics. Gasps rippled through the staff. Guards exchanged stunned glances. Did they really hear what they thought they heard? The king wasn't just threatening anymore. He was making good on it. He was summoning the very institutions that define the monarchy's strength, its custodians, its protectors, its enforcers. And Harry stood frozen, his chest rising and falling, his fists clenching tighter. Did he underestimate his father's resolve? Or had he secretly hoped Charles would never go so far as to bring in the law? Let's pause here and ask, what does it mean for a father to call the police on his son? In most families, it would be an act of ultimate betrayal. But in the monarchy, the stakes are even higher. It isn't just family, it's the crown. The jewels in that trunk weren't merely glittering ornaments. They were symbols of a dynasty, artifacts tied to a princess whose name could still move crowds to tears. For them to be in Harry's possession was a scandal. For them to be exposed as missing from the vaults was a catastrophe. Within minutes, chaos spread. The hum of radios filled the halls. Footsteps echoed on marble as aides scrambled. A call was placed, hurried and tense, to the Crown Jeweller's office. And somewhere inside Clarence House, a secure line buzzed through to Scotland Yard. Harry's eyes burned. His voice broke the silence, low and simmering. So this is it. After 19 months, after everything, we meet like this? You'd rather see me dragged into a police inquiry than listen to what I have to say. But Charles didn't waver. You brought this upon yourself, he replied, his voice trembling not with weakness but with fury. You brought her jewels here. You knew what it meant. You knew what it would do. And that's when the past came rushing into the room, uninvited but unavoidable. Diana, the ghost at the center of every unspoken wound. Her memory had always been a battlefield between father and son. To Charles, she was a specter, forever adored, forever compared, forever overshadowing. To Harry, she was the mother who never got justice, the figure whose legacy he felt bound to protect, even if it meant standing against his own blood. The trunk wasn't just full of jewels. It was full of unhealed wounds, old betrayals, and ghosts neither man could escape. The middle of this moment was pure theater. Imagine the staff, pretending not to listen while every ear strained for scraps of dialogue. Imagine Harry, pacing now, his voice rising. They belong to us, to William and me. Don't act as if you don't know that. Charles shot back. You think dragging them here proves your point? You think parading them through the streets of London does justice to her memory? You dishonor her more than anyone by making her things weapons in this feud. Every word was like a dagger. And then came the first knock at the door. Firm. Official. The kind of knock that carries authority. The kind of knock that changes everything. The aide returned, face pale, bowing slightly. Your Majesty, the Crown Jeweler has arrived. Charles's expression didn't shift. Bring him in. Harry's breath caught. His jaw tightened. He turned toward his father, eyes blazing. You really are going through with this? But Charles didn't answer. He didn't need to. The jeweler was already on his way in, an older man, dignified, carrying with him the weight of centuries of royal tradition. And with his entrance, the room seemed to shrink. The trunk was reopened. Piece by piece, the jewels were lifted out and examined. Gasps followed each reveal. Recognition flickered in every eye. There was no doubt. These were Diana's. The jeweler's face grew graver with each passing second, and when he finally spoke, his words landed like thunder. These should not be here. And in that instant, the scandal became undeniable. No longer whispers. No longer suspicion. Official confirmation. The cliffhanger was set. Because just as the crown jeweler prepared to deliver his report directly to the king, another sound cut through the room. The distant wail of approaching sirens. The police were on their way. And what happened when they arrived would turn Clarence House into the center of the most explosive royal scandal of the century. The sound pierced the quiet like a blade, sirens. Low at first, then louder, closer, until their wail filled the courtyard of Clarence House. Heads turned. Curtains twitched. The staff who had been pretending to go about their duties froze in place. It wasn't a drill. Scotland Yard was here. Imagine that scene. Blue lights reflecting off the black iron gates. The unmistakable rumble of engines as police vehicles pulled up, one after another, until the royal residence, normally a symbol of order and control, looked more like the scene of a raid. For centuries, Clarence House had stood as the backdrop to royal dinners, state meetings, and family gatherings. But on this day, it became the front line of a royal scandal. Inside, Harry's face turned ashen, though his jaw remained locked with defiance. He had called his father's bluff, and now he was realizing, Charles never bluffs. The king stood motionless, watching the reaction unfold, his expression unreadable but his decision clear. This was no longer family business. This was official. The crown jeweler still hovered by the open trunk, his gloved hands carefully cradling a diamond tiara as though it were a piece of explosive glass. His verdict had already sealed the moment. These were Diana's jewels, unmistakably. And now, with Scotland Yard at the gates, the situation had spiraled into something far bigger than father and son. Let's ask the question burning in everyone's mind. Why would Charles do this? Why risk dragging his own son into a police investigation, knowing the scandal it would unleash? The answer is both simple and devastating. control. For Charles, allowing the discovery to remain family only would mean vulnerability. The press would sniff it out. Rumors would swirl unchecked. But by calling in the police, Charles was seizing the narrative, sending a message not just to Harry, but to the entire world. The crown would not tolerate even the appearance of betrayal. And so, as the gates creaked open and the police stepped inside, the gravity of the moment became undeniable. Officers in dark uniforms filed into the courtyard, their radios crackling, their expressions grave. They weren't here to make arrests. Not yet. They were here to investigate, to document, to take statements. But here's the irony. The sight of Scotland Yard officers at Clarence House didn't just shock those inside. It rippled across London in minutes. Tourists with cameras caught glimpses. Paparazzi already stationed outside snapped frantically. Within the hour, images of flashing blue lights at Clarence House began circulating online. The hashtags #RoyalRaid and #Harry'sTrunk trended worldwide before the first official statement was even drafted. Back inside, the tension was unbearable. One officer approached the king first, bowing slightly before speaking. "Your Majesty, we were summoned regarding a matter of property." Charles's voice was clipped, formal. "You are to examine the contents of that trunk. The crown jeweler has already confirmed their identity." The officer nodded, his eyes shifting toward Harry, who stood rigid, his arms folded tightly across his chest. And here's where the emotional gut punch hit hardest. Because Harry, for all his defiance, wasn't just standing there as a duke. He was standing there as Diana's son. The jewels in that trunk weren't trinkets. They were relics of his mother, the last tangible pieces of her legacy he could hold in his hands. To have them treated as evidence, to watch them cataloged by police, must have felt like losing her all over again. He finally broke his silence. "These are my mother's. They should never have been locked away like trophies. She wanted them for her sons." His voice cracked on the last word, but his eyes burned with fire. The officer, professional to the core, did not respond emotionally. "We'll need to confirm chain of custody, sir. For now, they'll be taken for secure storage." Harry stepped forward, his anger spilling over. "You're taking them? From me? Again?" Charles's reply came swiftly, sharp as a whip. "They were never yours to take." It was like watching two worlds collide. The grieving son clinging to the memory of his mother, and the king protecting the institution that had always feared Diana's shadow. And now, Scotland Yard was the referee, caught in the middle of a feud that had been simmering for decades. The middle of this chapter is where the contradictions explode. On the one hand, Charles was asserting his authority, demonstrating that even his son wasn't above the crown. On the other, Harry was embodying the rebellious, wounded legacy of Diana, showing the world that he would not be silenced. And the police, stoic, procedural, were about to turn a private father-son clash into a matter of national record. Piece by piece, the jewels were logged. Photographs were taken. Cases were sealed. Each click of the camera shutter was like a hammer driving nails into the coffin of royal secrecy. And yet, amid the chaos, there was something even more shocking. Because when the inventory list was read aloud, a detail emerged that stopped everyone cold. One piece was missing. The sapphire choker Diana had worn so famously, the one immortalized in countless photographs, was nowhere to be found. The crown jeweler froze, his brow furrowed. Charles's face drained of color, and Harry's silence spoke volumes. Where was it? Who had it? And why wasn't it in that trunk with the rest? The revelation of that missing piece didn't just deepen the scandal. It detonated it. Because if Harry didn't have it, then someone else did. And what came next would expose secrets inside the royal vaults that no one was prepared to face. The silence was absolute. Even the distant hum of the city beyond Clarence House seemed to fade, as though London itself was holding its breath. The officer's voice had been clear. One piece unaccounted for, the sapphire choker. The words echoed around the hall like a gunshot. The crown jeweler adjusted his glasses, flipping through his notes with growing urgency. It should be here. It was part of the collection. Its absence is highly irregular. Highly irregular. That was the diplomatic phrase. What he really meant was catastrophic. Charles's face hardened. His fury, which had moments ago been aimed solely at Harry, now flickered with something else, fear. Because the sapphire choker wasn't just another jewel. It was the jewel. The piece Diana had worn in that unforgettable moment when she transformed her sapphire engagement brooch into a daring, statement-making necklace. An act of independence, a defiant fashion statement that whispered rebellion against the very institution now policing its whereabouts. And now, it was missing. Harry shifted uncomfortably, his silence suddenly louder than any denial could have been. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted away. To Charles, that silence was damning. "Where is it?" the king demanded, his voice booming across the hall. Harry didn't answer. Charles stepped closer, his fury reigniting. "Don't play games with me, Harry. The choker, where is it?" But Harry's reply, when it came, was devastating. "Do you really think I'd be stupid enough to bring everything here? Do you think I'd hand you all of her legacy in one trunk?" The words landed like a bomb. Gasps erupted from the staff who had dared remain at the edges of the room. The police officers glanced at one another, scribbling frantically into their notebooks. And Charles, his face twisted with rage and disbelief, looked as though his son had just confessed to treason. "You mean to tell me," Charles seethed, "that you've hidden it, that you've deliberately withheld one of her most iconic pieces?" Harry's voice rose, sharp, cutting. "I've kept it safe. Away from here. Away from you. Away from your vaults where it would be buried and forgotten. It's the one piece that still belongs to her spirit, and I won't let you take it." And there it was. The open defiance. The unmasking of Harry's intent. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an oversight. This was a standoff. The middle of this moment was agony. Imagine Charles's fury, his fists clenching, his face reddening. To him, the missing choker wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was proof that Harry was challenging his authority, undermining the monarchy's control of Diana's legacy. To Harry, it was something far more personal, a rebellion, a way of preserving the mother he lost, untainted by the institution that, in his eyes, destroyed her. The police, caught in the crossfire, treaded carefully. "Your Majesty," one officer said cautiously, "if the piece has been deliberately withheld, we may need to open a formal inquiry. This goes beyond mere possession. It would be considered concealment." The word concealment struck like thunder. It meant escalation. It meant legal jeopardy. It meant scandal on a global scale. Charles wasted no time. "Do it," he snapped. "Open the inquiry. If my son insists on playing the martyr, then let him do so before the law, not before me." Harry laughed bitterly, a hollow, cutting sound. "Perfect. That's all I am to you, isn't it? Not a son, not a man, just a problem to be managed. Another threat to your crown." The room was boiling over now. The sapphire choker had become the centerpiece of a battle that was about far more than jewels. It was about memory, control, and betrayal. And then came the twist no one expected. The crown jeweler, still sifting through his notes and murmuring to himself, suddenly froze. His hand trembled as he held up a faded entry in his ledger. "Wait, this can't be right." Everyone turned. The jeweler cleared his throat, his voice uneven. According to the vault records, the sapphire choker was signed out years ago. Not to Prince Harry, not to Prince William, but to another member of the family. The room erupted in whispers. Charles's eyes widened. Harry's expression shifted from defiance to confusion. The police officers leaned in, their pens poised. The jeweler continued, his voice firmer now. "It was signed out to the Duchess of York. Sarah Ferguson. Fergie." The revelation hit like an earthquake. The missing sapphire wasn't in Harry's hands at all. It had been legally removed from the vaults long ago, and by someone the family thought was long out of the inner circle. Why her? Why then? And where was it now? The cliffhanger had snapped wide open, because the scandal was no longer just Harry versus Charles. It had just pulled another royal player into the firestorm. And what Sarah Ferguson's involvement revealed would turn this family drama into a full-blown war. The name alone was enough to set the room ablaze. Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. Fergie. The moment the crown jeweler read her name aloud, Clarence's house erupted in whispers, gasps, and frantic glances. The very suggestion that she, once married to Prince Andrew, long divorced, long sidelined, long considered a scandalous footnote in royal history, could be connected to Diana's missing sapphire choker was enough to turn the entire narrative on its head. Charles's face turned ashen. He didn't even try to hide his shock. "That's impossible," he muttered under his breath, though his voice carried across the hall. "She would never have been entrusted with something of that value. Never." But the jeweler was adamant. His trembling hands gripped the ledger tightly. "The records are clear, Your Majesty." The choker was signed out. March 2002. The authorization came through official channels. My predecessor logged the release under the Duchess of York's name. March 2002. The timing was peculiar, wasn't it? Nearly 5 years after Diana's death. Long after Fergie's divorce from Prince Andrew. A time when she was struggling financially, trying desperately to keep herself relevant while drowning in debt. And yet, there it was in black and white. The royal vault had released one of Diana's most iconic jewels into her hands. Why? Harry's expression flickered, confusion first, then suspicion. "So it was never in my possession," he said bitterly. "And yet you threatened to have me arrested for theft? All along, it's been missing because someone else had it. Convenient." Charles shot him a withering glare. "Don't twist this, Harry. The rest of the collection was still in your trunk. Do you deny that?" But Harry wasn't listening anymore. His mind, like the rest of the room's, was spinning around one name: Sarah Ferguson. The middle of this moment was chaos wrapped in history. Fergie had always been a thorn in the monarchy's side. From the infamous, toe-sucking scandal splashed across tabloids in the 90s to her years of money troubles, she was the embarrassing relative the firm couldn't quite shake. And yet, through it all, she somehow lingered in royal circles, close to Andrew, occasionally welcomed back into family events, tolerated more than embraced. But to connect her name to Diana's sapphire choker? That was more than scandal. That was treachery. Questions erupted in every direction. Why was she given the choker? Was it on loan? Was it supposed to be returned? If so, why hadn't it been? And most damning of all, where was it now? Charles's fury shifted. For the first time that day, his anger wasn't solely locked on Harry. His voice, sharp and venomous, lashed out at the room itself. "Find her. Find Sarah. At once. If she has that choker, then she will answer for it." Harry, however, couldn't resist twisting the knife. "So all this rage, all these threats against me, and it turns out you didn't even know where your own vault stood. Perhaps the problem isn't me, Father. Perhaps the problem is that your precious institution can't keep track of its own history." The words sliced deep. Charles's lips curled, but he said nothing. His silence was damning enough. Meanwhile, Scotland Yard officers took notes rapidly, their pens scratching across paper. They weren't there for family politics. They were there for evidence. And now, their investigation had widened. Harry's trunk was no longer the sole focus. The missing sapphire choker was officially a matter of interest, and Sarah Ferguson was now at the center of it. Let's step back for a moment and consider the irony. Sarah Ferguson, cast out of the firm, mocked in the press, scrambling for financial survival, had somehow become the holder of one of the most priceless jewels associated with Diana, the very woman who had once been her friend, her rival, and, in some ways, her mirror. Both outsiders, both adored and reviled, both consumed by the monarchy's brutal glare. Could it be possible that Diana herself had entrusted the choker to Sarah before her death? Was it a gesture of solidarity, woman to woman, against the crown? Or was this darker? Had Sarah taken it, or been given it under questionable circumstances, only to let it vanish in her years of financial desperation? The contradictions are staggering. On one hand, Sarah was fiercely loyal to her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, who remained beloved members of the family. On the other, she was infamous for her scandals, her debts, her questionable business deals. Could the choker have been collateral in one of those shady transactions? Could it have been sold, pawned, or hidden away, lost in the endless swirl of Fergie's financial chaos? As the whispers thickened, Charles turned his glare back to Harry. "You see what you've done? By dragging those jewels here, you've exposed rot in the very heart of this family. Do you even understand the damage?" But Harry, undeterred, shot back. "Maybe that rot needed to be exposed. Maybe it's about time the world sees how deep it goes." And then came the next shock. One of the officers, phone in hand, stepped forward cautiously. "Your Majesty, we've reached out for a statement from the Duchess of York. She claims she doesn't have the sapphire choker." The room held its breath. "But," the officer added, his voice tightening, "she insists Diana gave it to her personally in confidence before her death. She says it was never the crown's to keep." The revelation dropped like a thunderclap. If Sarah was telling the truth, then everything changed. The monarchy's claim to Diana's jewels wasn't as airtight as Charles believed. Diana may have taken steps, quietly, secretly, to give her most prized possession to a woman the monarchy despised. But why? Why Sarah? And where was it now? The cliffhanger was brutal, because the answer to that question wouldn't just change how the world viewed Sarah Ferguson. It would rewrite the very narrative of Diana's legacy and pit father and son against each other in a battle neither could win. The words rang out like a thunderclap. Diana gave it to me. Sarah Ferguson's alleged claim landed with the force of an earthquake. Clarence House trembled with the weight of it. Not physically, but emotionally, politically, symbolically. Everyone knew what those words meant. If true, Diana's last private act had not been recorded in ledgers, nor witnessed in vaults, nor sanctioned by royal decree. It had been a secret, a personal handover, an intimate gift whispered from one woman to another. And if Diana truly gave that sapphire choker to Sarah Ferguson, then the monarchy's legal claim over it was no longer unchallenged. Charles's face drained of color. His rage gave way to something colder, fear. Because this wasn't just about a missing piece of jewelry anymore. This was about Diana's agency, her will, her defiance. And it came roaring back from beyond the grave at the worst possible moment. Harry seized on it instantly. Do you hear that? His voice was sharp, rising with triumphant vindication. Mother wanted her legacy in the hands of people she trusted, not locked away in your vaults, not buried under your control. She made her choice. She gave it to Sarah. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Scotland Yard officers scribbled more furiously than ever. And Charles? His hands gripped the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. You will not twist this family's history, Charles spat. Diana's possessions belong to the crown after her death. Whatever fantasies Sarah Ferguson spins are lies to protect herself. But Harry wasn't backing down. He stepped forward, eyes blazing. Lies? Or truth you don't want to face? She wanted me and William to have her things. Everyone knows that. And if she trusted Sarah with one piece, maybe it was because she knew you'd never respect her wishes. The middle of this moment was raw, volatile, explosive. For years, Diana's memory had been a silent battlefield inside the royal family. To Charles, she was a ghost that refused to stay buried. To Harry, she was a guiding star, the one person he believed would never betray him. And now, her alleged secret gift had detonated in the middle of Clarence House like a grenade. The officers pressed the matter. Your Majesty, if there's reason to believe the choker was privately transferred by Princess Diana before her death, that complicates its legal status. It may not fall strictly under crown property. The word complicates was far too mild for what had just happened. It didn't just complicate things. It upended them. Charles's eyes darkened. Diana was not above the law, nor is Sarah Ferguson, and certainly not you, Harry. Harry shot back without missing a beat. She was above your law. That's why the people loved her. That's why they'll believe Sarah. And that's why this entire monarchy is terrified of her even now. Let's pause and think about the stakes here. If Sarah Ferguson was telling the truth, then the monarchy was guilty of suppressing Diana's wishes for decades. If she was lying, then she had just inserted herself into the biggest royal scandal of the century with a claim that would ignite a media frenzy. Either way, the firestorm was unstoppable, and the firestorm began to burn almost instantly. Phones buzzed. Staff whispered urgently. Reporters already massed outside Clarence House had caught wind of Sarah's statement. Within minutes, headlines flashed across screens around the world. Fergie claims Diana gave her jewels. Missing sapphire, royal family in crisis. Charles and Harry clash over Diana's legacy. The monarchy's carefully constructed wall of silence had crumbled in real time. Inside Clarence House, Charles turned away, his shoulders heavy with the weight of it. She will destroy us, he muttered, almost to himself. From the grave, she will destroy us all. Harry heard it, and for the first time, a flicker of something softer crossed his face. Not triumph, but grief. She didn't want to destroy you, he said quietly. She just wanted to be heard. The contradiction cut to the heart of the matter. Diana's legacy was not destruction, it was defiance. But to Charles, defiance felt like destruction. And in that painful contradiction lay the seeds of their endless war. The climax of this chapter arrived when an officer stepped forward, holding out a formal document. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, We need written statements from both of you. Immediately. This is now an official investigation. Statements. On paper. Evidence. The kind of records that history does not erase. Charles recoiled. To commit his words to paper, to give Scotland Yard a document that could one day be leaked, was his worst nightmare. Harry, however, leaned into it. Fine, he said. I'll tell them everything. And with that, the battle lines were drawn. Father against son. Institution against memory. The crown against Diana's ghost. But just as the first pen touched paper, a voice broke the tension. Aides rushed into the room, breathless, panicked, clutching phones. Your Majesty, it's begun. Sarah Ferguson is live on television. The cliffhanger snapped shut like a trap. Because what Fergie was about to reveal on live broadcast wouldn't just pour gasoline on the scandal. It would drag the monarchy into a firestorm from which there was no return. The words hit Clarence House like a cannon shot. Sarah Ferguson is live on television. Every head turned. Aides clutched their phones tighter, their faces pale with disbelief. Harry stiffened, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, as though part of him had expected this. Charles, however, froze, his body rigid, his breathing shallow, his fury twisting into something else entirely, dread. Because Sarah Ferguson wasn't just giving a statement. She wasn't just answering questions. She had gone live. No palace filter. No royal handler. No carefully edited article. She had taken her story straight to the world. Think about the weight of that. A woman long exiled to the margins of the royal family, branded a scandal, mocked by the press, ridiculed for decades, suddenly at the center of the most explosive royal drama since Diana herself. And she had a microphone. The television inside Clarence House flickered to life. The staff gathered, their eyes glued to the screen. Scotland Yard officers paused their note-taking. Even the crown jeweler leaned forward, his expression tense. And there she was, Sarah Ferguson, not the tabloid caricature, not the embattled ex-duchess in debt, but a woman composed, deliberate, her auburn hair perfectly coiffed, her eyes burning with conviction. She leaned toward the camera, and then she said it. Diana gave me the sapphire choker herself. It was not the crown's to take. It was her gift, her trust, her way of ensuring that her spirit lived on outside the palace walls. Gasps erupted inside Clarence House. Harry's heart pounded in his chest. Charles's jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. Sarah continued, her voice steady, measured, devastating. She told me, if they lock it away, the world will forget me. Keep this safe, Sarah. Keep it where the crown cannot bury it. The impact was immediate. The room shook with whispers, with the scribbling of frantic pens. Scotland Yard officers exchanged sharp glances. Was this proof? Was this fabrication? Or was this Diana's voice, reaching from beyond the grave? Harry's face lit with something that looked dangerously close to triumph. Do you hear her? He whispered to Charles, not taking his eyes off the screen. Do you finally hear her? But Charles, oh Charles. His fury ignited anew, this time colder, sharper, far more dangerous. This is manipulation, he spat. This is Sarah Ferguson clawing her way back into relevance on the back of your mother's memory. Yet the world outside Clarence House wasn't hearing manipulation. They were hearing revelation. Social media exploded in real time. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Diana's gift. Hashtag Fergie speaks. Hashtag Sapphire scandal. Television anchors broke into programming. Commentators debated furiously. Was Sarah telling the truth? Had Diana secretly outmaneuvered the monarchy one final time? The middle of this chapter was a whirlwind. Inside Clarence House, the atmosphere boiled. Charles paced the floor, barking orders at aides. Cut the broadcast. Shut her down. But it was too late. Once live, once global, there was no shutting it down. Harry, meanwhile, stood still, transfixed, as if every word Sarah spoke was validation for everything he had ever believed about his mother's struggle. Sarah's broadcast grew bolder. I know what this will cost me. I know what they'll say. But I promised Diana. I promised her I would never let the crown erase her. And so today, I keep that promise. The choker is safe, and it will never again be locked in their vaults. The choker is safe. The line sent shivers down every spine in the room. The missing sapphire wasn't lost. It wasn't stolen. It wasn't sold. It was hidden, deliberately, defiantly, and Sarah Ferguson had just declared that to the world. Charles's fury erupted. She dares defy me? She dares defy the crown itself. His voice shook with rage, but underneath it was something else. Fear. Because Sarah's words carried a dangerous implication. The monarchy could not control Diana, not in life, not in death, not even through her possessions. Harry turned to him, his eyes fierce. Maybe it's not defiance. Maybe it's justice. Maybe she's doing what you never had the courage to do. Honor her wishes. The contradiction burned. To Charles, it was betrayal. To Harry, it was liberation. To the watching world, it was drama of the highest order. And then Sarah delivered her final blow. The monarchy wants you to believe that Diana is gone. But she isn't. She lives in her children, in her friends, in every person she touched. And she lives in this sapphire. As long as I draw breath, it will remain beyond their reach. The broadcast cut. Silence filled Clarence's house. And then, chaos. Phones rang. Reporters shouted through the gates. Cameras flashed. The monarchy was officially in crisis. But the real cliffhanger came not from the broadcast, not from the scandal, but from the quiet words Charles muttered as he sank into a chair, pale, trembling, his hands shaking. She's taken it too far. She's declared war. And if Sarah Ferguson had declared war, then the next battle would not be fought in whispers. It would be fought in public, under the glare of the world. Clarence's house was no longer a palace. It was a war room. Phones rang off the hook. Advisors rushed in and out with folders, tablets, and urgent whispers. Scotland Yard officers remained stationed in corners, their pens scratching across endless reports. The crown jeweler sat slumped in a chair, his face still pale from the shock of Sarah Ferguson's broadcast. And in the middle of it all sat King Charles, rigid, silent, simmering with a rage so cold it froze the room around him. Sarah Ferguson had gone live. She had declared Diana's sapphire choker a personal gift. She had dared the monarchy to stop her. And in doing so, she had thrown a grenade into the already fragile foundations of the crown. Charles finally spoke, his voice low but sharp enough to slice the air. We hit back. Immediately. A counterstatement. She is lying. Fabricating. Manipulating Diana's name for her own gain. An aide stammered. Your Majesty, the broadcast is already viral. Social media is flooded. The headlines are everywhere. Then we bury it. Charles snapped. We bury her. Discredit her. Remind the world who she is, a woman of scandal, a woman in debt, a woman who has no right to speak Diana's name. The staff nodded furiously, scribbling notes, already drafting lines for the palace's statement. But in the corner stood Harry, silent, watching his father spin strategy while ignoring the heart of the matter. Discredit Sarah? Harry finally said, his voice cutting through the room. That's your answer? That's all it ever is with you. Silence them. Shame them. Pretend the truth doesn't exist. Isn't that what you tried with her? With Diana? Every head turned. The room froze. Harry's words struck like lightning. Charles's eyes locked onto him, burning with fury. Do not speak of what you do not understand. But Harry stepped closer, his voice rising, his defiance blazing. I understand perfectly. I watched it. I lived it. The endless attempts to erase her, to bury her light so the crown could shine brighter. And now, when Sarah dares to say out loud what the world already believes, that Diana wanted to be remembered, not hidden, you call it war. The middle of this chapter was a battlefield of words. On one side, Charles, the king, desperate to protect the institution, determined to control the narrative, willing to scorch the earth to keep the monarchy intact. On the other, Harry, Diana's son, emboldened by Sarah Ferguson's broadcast, no longer willing to bend, no longer afraid to stand against his father. The contradiction was stark. Charles believed survival meant silence, suppression, authority. Harry believed survival meant truth, exposure, rebellion. And now, the two men stood inches apart, their voices clashing like swords. You will not stand in my way, Charles thundered. You think the people love you? They do not. They tire of your complaints, your interviews, your endless grievances. You are no Diana. Harry's reply was swift, devastating. Maybe not, but I am her son, and the people will believe me long before they believe you. The words silenced the room. Staff glanced nervously at each other. The officers paused their notes. Because in that one line, Harry had declared himself not just Diana's heir, but Charles's rival. And then, as if on cue, the televisions flickered again. Sarah Ferguson's broadcast was being replayed across every channel. Commentators dissected her words. Crowds gathered outside Clarence's house, chanting Diana's name. The world wasn't waiting for the palace's counterattack. The world was already taking sides. Charles slammed his fist onto the table, rattling glasses and papers. Draft the statement. Now. She will not win. Not while I draw breath. But Harry stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. And if you attack her, you attack Diana. And if you attack Diana, you attack me. The staff froze. The police stiffened. And Charles, the king, the father, the man, looked into his son's eyes and realized the unthinkable. Harry wasn't bluffing. The cliffhanger exploded. Because in that instant, Harry made his choice. He wasn't standing with the monarchy. He was standing with Sarah. He was standing with Diana. And the counterattack Charles had ordered would not just be a strike against Sarah Ferguson. It would be a strike against his own son.